With that, I'm going to hand to the amazing ladies in New York. Susan Ganz, you're going to be leading this discussion, talking about resilience, relationship building, and risk taking. Over to you, ladies.
Thank you so much, Theto, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for the Female Wave of Change for having us and for traveling to New York City. There can be complexity, and we are women, so we're up to those challenges. So today we're going to be talking about 3 R's, as you heard: resiliency, relationship building, and risk taking. I'm Susan Ganz. I'm the Female Wave of Change Ambassador for New York City or New York. And I have a background professionally about making strategic impact. And I'm going to be joined today by our esteemed panelists who all have a special connection to the Female Wave of Change. So first, we have on our panel Alison Cyrus, who is a risk management executive, and she is an alum of the Women Leading in Change program. She comes to us with over 20 years of banking and risk management experience in a variety of disciplines, including operational risk, enterprise-wide risk management, and compliance across the first and second lines of defense. She has experience leading, mentoring, promoting objectives, managing team morale, and coaching to foster development. Secondly, on our panel, we have Janine Ting Jansen, who is an inclusion and diversity executive. More about Janine. She was also on a panel for us for the Female Wave of Change in November of 2019. She is currently a Senior Director of Inclusion and Diversity at Teva Pharmaceuticals. She has over 15 years of experience in the HR field, working in finance, law, and pharmaceuticals, supporting business leaders. Her areas of expertise include diversity, talent, recruitment, strategy, and data storytelling. She was recently featured as a contributing author for the book Latinas Rising Up in HR. And lastly, we have Tina Thompson as one of our panelists. Tina holds a special place in my heart. She's the one that introduced me to the Female Wave of Change, and she's an honorary ambassador. In her professional life, she's an operations executive. More about Tina: she's an advocate for justice, an experienced operations executive, and certified leadership coach. Above all else, Tina likes to say she's a mother to her miracle son, Nicholas, and his loving wife, Lisa. I'm going to stop the share and get into our discussion. So we've heard a lot today and throughout the conference about resilience. And after a number of conversations that I've had over the past couple of years while we've been in this pandemic, it's from within that this inner strength comes. And I see a lot of strength coming from women. So I'm going to ask our panelists, as they reflect on their experience of the pandemic, to share what they've learned about resiliency as it relates to their professional and personal lives. And I'm going to start with Janine.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be amongst all of you as we sit here and really just focus on what's next. When I think of resiliency, I think of all of the challenges that we have all faced. And when we have the consideration of what's happened over the past year and a half, there's been a lot happening. In the United States particularly, women have been impacted in what we've been calling the C-session. We have been leaving the workforce in even greater numbers. And with that comes this moment of how do we support women to really challenge this? And when I think of the group dynamic, right, the numbers, we're suffering. And with that comes, how do we support one another on an individual level? And with this comes the resiliency moment. The moment is to really give us an opportunity to slow down and ask each other what we need, right? What we truly need in the moment to support each other and to really gear ourselves and to practice what we do the next time. Because what we've seen is that we'll get hit with the situation with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter in the United States. We'll get hit with the visible Asian hate that came about in the United States. And these crises that continue, even with COVID, even the far-reaching impact it has to many HR professionals. And how do we navigate and support our employees in this moment? And being that I in particular sit in HR, and how do we have these conversations about what do we do next, right? And follow different routines, support the employees where they are, but also to support us ourselves as professionals. I have 3 young children, and navigating the virtual learning environment, navigating leaning in at work and managing all of this, it really gives you a moment that there's no day that is the same. There's no week that is the same. And the more that we can reflect and really go through a moment of where do we prioritize the action, prioritize our next action, really care for each other so that we can be able to get up the next day, right? And focus on that next top priority. That's the resilience moment. The more we practice this, the more we embrace it, the ability to be extremely uncomfortable not having the answers to all the decisions. These are the pieces that come in with resiliency that's hard. It's hard to do it the first time and the next time. But the more that we do this, the better able we are positioned, right, for these struggles that we're going through. So these struggles are not going away. There will be something different around the corner. But that resilience and that community that we can all build amongst each other, that's truly a power moment where we can all really thrive together and focus on all of these challenges.
Thanks, Janine. I really appreciate what you said, especially about community. Over to you, Tina, for your perspective on this question.
Good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening around the world. Susan, it's not an easy question to answer because you know, many of our sisters from around the world have actually touched on the subject so well. In fact, they haven't just touched on it, they've really expanded on it. I would say that, you know, obviously the theme of don't waste the crisis is key. Okay, I would say we need to build adaptability into our DNA. Accept the crisis, you know, as an invitation to reimagine ourselves, our resources, our skill sets, and the way in which we engage with disruption, because this is not the first one. Any futurist will tell you that, you know, we will have other disruptors. COVID was one of them. I mean, there's a whole series, you know, in the digital space, you know, we have the automation and robots and the machine learning. And then there is sustainability with climate change and those issues. You know, there are going to be several disruptors. The shifts in geopolitics, of course, look at Brexit, look at the China-US trade war and several other disruptors, many of which were accelerated and still are being accelerated because of COVID. And so, yes, we have to survive COVID, but we can use it to build adaptability into our DNA. There are no quick fixes, and Janine explained that very carefully, but I think the biggest shift we can make is in our attitudes towards this and to build resilience. There's, you know, I see people achieve so much, but the grit they need to stay resilient is perhaps the silver bullet.
Absolutely. I really appreciate what you said about adaptability and adjusting our attitudes and having the grit to move forward no matter what challenges are in front of us. And over to you, Allison, your perspective on this question of resilience.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's really a pleasure to be here amongst all of you. When I think about resiliency, I think back in the last 18 months and the displays of resiliency I've seen every day while, you know, on a conference call, watching a mom, you know, juggle the needs of her kids in the background while taking a call, while, you know, making notes, or just watching, you know, people have, you know, things happening in the background of their lives while they continue to push forward and meet those deliverables. And I've also, you know, have had conversations with staff who are worried about their children going back to school and the lack of, connection. And I've seen people every day have to bounce back from little things. Yes, I've seen people every day have to bounce back from little things and big things. So a lot of resiliency has been born in the last couple months, and a lot of people are getting to display, to flex that muscle. So what I see people doing, and what people are realizing, is that sometimes with this need to bounce back is also the need to pause and think a little bit and have some redirection in the, built in within resiliency, is to take a moment for yourself to pause and redirect and bounce back. So I've been seeing a lot of that, and I think people need to remember that they should, redirection, rejection and redirection are part of, resiliency.
Yes, Allison, the rethinking, that taking a step back, that pausing instead of going on that hamster wheel that we tend to go on. So the next question I have is about, during this time, we needed to be very creative about how we connected with others, our friends, our family, our colleagues, our clients. What have you been doing to develop and grow your professional and personal relationships? And Allison, I'll start with you this time.
Well, before the pandemic, I guess all of these options, Zoom, House Party, all of these video apps were all available to us, but no one thought about calling up their friends and using them to communicate. And then in the early days of the pandemic, we were all so desperate for connection. We were having, dinner parties and games nights and all of those things. And I've noticed as the pandemic progressed, some of those things that people did initially have faded away, and people are now back in a sort of a slum. And you wonder, why haven't we learned the lesson that we could keep some of the things that we learned early on in the pandemic and use that to enhance, our way of life. So we have learned a lot of things in the pandemic, and I think we should start taking some of those on with us in day-to-day life, to help enhance our ongoing experience.
Absolutely. Those special times that maybe we had when we were growing up and little, and bringing them back like they were at the beginning of the pandemic. So over to you, Tina. How have you been creating connection? You're on mute, Tina. There you go.
Certainly increased a lot of connection, which we wouldn't do normally. In particular, leaders that I coach and work with, it's pushed them to make decisions for which they were not previously experienced, and to do so quickly. And so communication became key. Indeed, we've used technology in every way possible, but it became more about scheduling those touch points and being consistent and doing them every single day, because there were people that needed that very badly. And if you were an empath or an empath like I am, you absolutely absorbed a lot of that anxiety and that chaos that went on initially. And in order for it to become a way of life, really, we had to throw out, what we were doing in the past, and start to learn a new way to collaborate and to constantly check in on one another. Despite any differences, to just embrace and leverage the strength of those differences between us. Communication was key and still remains key.
Absolutely. And connection is one of our basic human needs that people crave, and something that was pushed on given the pandemic. And my mom lives in a nursing home, and who would have thought I would be visiting her by an outside window, and scheduling a window visit periodically was beyond my previous comprehension. Janine, over to you. How have you been creating connection?
Yeah, I think with this, I was able to navigate many virtual connects and platforms such as this. We were able to host various community calls with my group, Latinas Rising Up in HR, putting out a topic, connecting with one another. And that was one of those examples of keeping up professionally. Community-wise, we started having more hangouts outside and just gathering together. But what that community build was this moment of, you know what, we're walking more together and having conversation. We're doing more activities together locally, right? Versus this effect of many in the New York City area have of commuting into the city, being there the day and coming back home and being in a different space. So those are different, effects of how this planned out. The other thing I'll say is building connections differently with your family member. For me, with my children, they're school age. So they're 9, 7, and 5. So now they have witnessed, right? They've witnessed and heard me working all around the clock, right? And they frequently, they'll, storyline that, right? In the school now. They're also, I think, a little closer now than they maybe would have been because they didn't have interactions with others. Right. So when you think of these different family dynamics and how this played out, the connections, when I think of the groupings, right, it's your family, your personal, your professional, and then these community outliers that, they're around. We know you're there. I know you're there. I know Susan's there for me. And I can always ask her if I need something. But we're not able to have like a full catch up as we would like to because there's so many things happening. The last thing I'll share is that for something I developed with my kids, with my husband, was with the kids at night when we would slow down and protect the dinner hour, we would sit there and say, it's story time. And for us, we have the kids each say a couple sentences of any story that they like that comes to mind. And then the next one picks it up and the next one, and we go in this circle. And what we end up with is a really silly story. But what that has led to is a moment where I get feedback from the teachers that their kids are very happy to raise their hand, to ask questions, and to speak. And, not to say that we weren't doing this before, but I think we focused on doing it even more because we were having less connection in person, right, with the virtual learning. And, so there's this adaptation now, right, where I think what we're going to see is this hybrid approach of, we crave in person, but we're going to utilize this technology differently. And that's going to be our new normal. So when I think of the kids using tech and we maybe grieve for what we had before, we're also going to step forward and have different interactions, right? Their networks are going to be the ones they meet in person, but also the people they can connect with virtually in those learning experiences. So I think that's where we're going towards. And I think it's a good thing.
Thank you, Janine. And I love what you said about story time. That's such a fun thing. And what you also said about adapting to, while we crave in person, how can we use technology in different ways to create connection? And I always say I'm one phone call, text, WhatsApp, email, etc. away. And so to our final R, I'm going to quote a study from KPMG, which said only about 43% of women take big risks to boost their careers. Can each of you please speak to risks that you've taken in your careers and how it's impacted you? And I'll start with Tina.
Indeed. I always say risk and reward go hand in hand. If you don't take the risk, you'll never know. And so, I believe we need to stop constraining ourselves to our past understanding of logic, of taking risks, and forge forward and, constantly say, well, what would happen? You opening any thought process with what if, what would, really enables us to start to scenario plan, as it were. When I decided to leave my beloved South Africa and come to the US to join my son who was here, it was a massive risk. It was at a time when I was at the peak of my career, and everyone knew who I was. And, you know, the risk of going to a completely new country, to New York, of all places, and to pick up and start again, those are the questions I kept asking myself. I saw it also as a mini crisis, and possibly that's why through COVID, you know, I'm applying the same principles, because a crisis shows one's weaknesses and one's strengths. And, you know, if you start to focus on those strengths and to say, well, what if I did succeed? What if I did get a work visa? What if I finally became head of another organization? And so taking those risks, they're not easy. But again, back to our overall theme of being resilient, of building resiliency in the true sense of the word. Okay, it's an engineering term, and you know, it's at what pressure does steel crack? Well, you know, if you start to build that resilience, your risk taking is minimized. And then, of course, to reach out to the network. We've spoken a lot about support from others. My South African sister spoke about leaning on each other. We are here, and it's groups like Female Wave of Change where you can reach out when, having taken that risk, you are feeling a bit lost. So, you know, the power of the network can never be underestimated, but risk-taking is absolutely essential now that our whole world has been rearranged and turned on its head. There is no such thing as a new normal, because it was not normal to start off with. If, as I say, if we stop constraining ourselves to the past and look forward in new ways, in creative ways, in ways that we've never thought of, that's the adaptability that we talk about.
Absolutely. Those new ways of thinking and asking those powerful questions you posed about what if and what would. Very inspiring. Over to you, Janine. What about risk-taking from your perspective?
I think with risk-taking, we have to try things. We have to keep going. And I think for myself, I've deliberately put myself out there. I pursued 2 different educational pieces this year that really, they fed to my soul of what it is I like to continue pursuing in my career. So it's very positive. And on one hand, you could say, I'm fearful of the amount of time this requires. I'm fearful of what this is going to do to the things around me. But at the same time, I tried it, it worked, and everything's still fine. It's not always the case, right? Sometimes we make a mistake. And I think the other key is that set yourself up for success to take risks. I've had the pleasure of having bosses that said, you know, I voiced the fear to them before. What if I try this and it doesn't work? And like, well, then you come back and you tell me, and we have a honesty approach, right? And I share how very honestly, this is where I failed, and then we figure it out. But having that support from someone to say, when you try and if you fail, we will figure it out together. That's very powerful. So if you can identify individuals who are going to encircle you and empower you to take more risk, that is really, I think, the balance, because taking risk without feeling confident about taking it, that can be very scary. And I've also been there, right? But so I can say over time, building up these confident relationships, doing more calculated risk, but also with support. And even if all your supporters don't agree, you know that they'll be there and you can still take that risk, and you will identify the ways to pivot if it does fail, but you'll learn. So I would encourage everyone, that risk and that reward, it is very true. And females, we do not take enough risk. I don't know how I can say that we don't take enough risk. So if you think you're sitting and you're in a neutral moment and I'm not going to take that risk today, I want you to write down what it is you're choosing not to take a risk on, and think about it again in 3 days, because we are losing this game without taking risks. So I don't want to push anyone into taking too many, but it really is a really mirror moment that we're not doing enough of it.
So I think, Janine, what you're saying is to name the fear and to speak through it. And finally, Allison, your perspective.
Well, I have to summarize what Tina and Janine did say. Risk-taking is absolutely essential. If you don't take risks, you don't get any type of, not just reward, but you don't get any type of growth, any type of movement. In a business sense, a business grows because it takes risk. In a banking sense, you get paid by the amount of risk you take, you get paid more. So the same thing in this life, if we don't take risks, small risks to make small changes in our lives, or bigger risks to change everything, we won't get any growth. And it's also very important to, take calculated risk. As Janine said, you want to practice your resiliency, and, when you see it, resiliency works, you can take a bigger leap and take a calculated risk, and definitely have your network of key supporters who you can lean on to, talk you through some of the downtimes, because you will have moments of self-doubt, and we all have those. But you need a network, but you need to become comfortable with embracing risk. If you look at the past year, everything has changed, and everything keeps changing. So you can't stop change from happening. So you can decide for yourself what aspects of the life you want to change for yourself. What aspects of your life you're going to be proactive about creating that change. And then you take that leap and that risk, and you'll always be rewarded more so than having just sat still.
Thank you for that. And I think what you're saying is be the change. And in wrapping up our panel, I will just summarize some of the key points about asking what if, what would be the change, name your fear, and know that you could set yourself up with success with the support of not only yourself, but your community. So thank you for the Female Wave of Change for this opportunity.